Good morning. I hope everybody's well. So let's return to where we are. So we concluded for the second time, Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 3, the last page being page 1477. And as we've discussed a number of times, though the Rebbe Rashab concludes here, but he didn't really end the Hemshech, because we have questions and different ideas and themes that were left unfinished, at least to our eyes. And that's one of the reasons we went over it again a second time, to try to piece it together based on the Maimorim that Ayin Beis is based on. Namely, the Maimon Mika Shamalekenu, Hamakbir L'Sheves, from the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe, which we learned both Maimorim at length inside after we concluded this the first time. So, let me go over what the conclusion is that we have in writing, and then begin the process of trying to sum up that which was left unfinished, and how we may perhaps be able to know what the Rebbe Rashab would have written had he continued, again, based on those Maimorim and also based on learning what he has told us. So there are plenty of hints and different indicators that can help us put together this puzzle. In addition, I've also written up an essay, which I'm almost finished, a long essay, which does exactly the same thing in writing. And at the suggestion of some of you, I agreed we'll do that as well. We'll review that. But first, let me do it orally, at least in broad strokes. And then we will, I'll post online the entire essay. So those that want to follow, and I'm happy to study that by reading it through it, which is, again, essentially doing what we did here throughout the classes, but there it's more organized and more detailed. So with that said, let me go over what we concluded before we took a small break. And that is, I'm looking at the last pages of Ayin Beis, namely page 1477, 1476. So this concludes these pages, essentially 11 pages. It began on page 1466. And again, concluding 1477 is a relatively long piece on explaining Yichud. And namely, the Yichud, the mitzvah, the Yachdei Yisbarach, that being that we live in a world where the divine is concealed, the divine unity is concealed. So it's a fragmented world. Let's call it first, it's a diverse world. It's a multitude of different entities and species and details. When I say multitude, we're talking about the trillions and the trillions and the trillions, beyond numbers we can even describe, but it's definitely a large number. And I'm talking about everything in existence on Earth, the solar systems and beyond, and even that which we're not even aware of. And that reality, which is our existence, what you can call our scientific reality, our the empirical reality that we are familiar with, and including the things that are still mysteries. So all of that does not on its own recognize Hashem Echad. So the mitzvah it's actually a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. Liyachdei is baruch. The words he uses, the mitzvah is liyachdei, meaning not just to recognize that God is one in his domain, but to recognize all of this existence as part of God's oneness. And that, of course, requires a lot of work, because as I said, number one, it's concealed initially. Number two, we look at a world, so many different details, to recognize that they're all part of one reality, one divine reality, is an effort of magnitude that requires both contemplation, emotional alignment, emotional consciousness, and in general, just the whole process of being able to experience this oneness. Now, the interesting thing, of course, to add into this equation is that it's a lot easier today than it may have been in the past because of science and technology, interestingly. because that's exactly what science and technology does. Science is essentially the pursuit of finding the oneness, the individual, some call it the unifying field, the unified field principle or theory to find laws under which we can explain all phenomena. That's really what science has always been about, that things work under certain basic laws. So they've gotten it down to 4 basics, but they have not yet found that unified field theory, as it's called in science. But it is the search for unity. And technology is exactly that too. When you use your smartphone or any other communications or other forms of technology, you're essentially transcending time and space, where it would have taken so much more time and a lot of space to be able to connect 2 different parts of our existence. And now with technology, all that has become much easier and quicker. And it's a constant pursuit of speeding up the process to the point of no resistance at all, what they call superconductivity, for example. That the conductivity of electricity or other forms or other forces should be so seamless that even the bit of resistance that exists between matter and energy is gone. So all that helps us understand unity, which really is helping us understand divine unity. So getting back to the mitzvah is liyachde yizbarach. And that is, I'm looking at page 1466, where you use the words, mitzvah sakishma, mitzvah hayichud delakus, and a few other places he called it liyachde yizbarach, or sometimes expression, as he said here, yichud kutshebricha v'shchinte. Now, what is the point of that? That's not just connecting the divine with existence, but it's also connecting the divine beyond existence with the divine within existence. You really start breaking it down. That's really what the unity is about. And through the divine within existence, it connects it with existence itself. And I'll read a few lines that emphasize that shortly. So, he breaks it down that this yichud divides into two, actually 3. But 2, yichud tata, yichud ilah. And that's hinted to in the 2 parts of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, is yichud ilah, Hashem echad, yichud tata. More broadly, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem echad, yichud ilah, Baruch Shem Kved Malchusei, Leilam Vod. As he explained, when you say Shem and Kved Malchusei, you're talking about Elokus that relates to existence, yichud tata. But however you interpret, it's 2 yichudim. And then there's the 3rd aspect, uniting these very 2. Because they're different, they're opposites, he actually called them. They referred to them as hahofchim on page 1474. Why? Because das elyon, which is the driving force of Yichudei Law, is seeing that there is no existence altogether from God's point of view. There's a yesh amiti, and everything else is ayin, insignificant. Das tachten is the opposite. The yesh is existence, yesh anivra. And from there you go from the bottom up to discover the ayin alaki within the existence. And yet we say Kel Deus Hashem, both deis come together. Hence you have, using his words, that an Atzmus, Beza Deus Achasein, both perspectives are one, Sheshneim Emes v'Shneim Yuchadim Be'ein Sof u'B'chinas Bitl v'Ayin Mamish. So they're both one and they're both united in Ein Sof and Bitl v'Ayin Mamish. And he explained that length relatively on page 1474 and on why they're both one, because it's two Ritzenis. God desired, once he chose to manifest, he chose to manifest in 2 ways. A divine energy that's beyond existence, that you can't even call a mocker to the yesh, that's the das elyon. And the second is das tachten, a divine energy that relates to existence. And initially, both of them are completely interwoven and seamlessly connected, because it's all part of Hashem's larger plan. Then comes another force that God employed, which is called the tzimtzum, and the parsa, the concealment, and the partition that divides the two. So now the second level, meaning das tachten, the energy that relates to existence, emerges and is discernible. And the operative example he gave was of a teacher, a mashpia and a makabel, that the mashpia, everything is all connected within his mind, but then he employs a tzimtzum and a parsa to be able to communicate to a student, and then there is a distinction. So the distinction is from our perspective, not from the teacher's perspective, from the student, from the makabel's perspective. And even after the tzimtzum, there's also no distinction from God's perspective, because the tzimtzum and parsa does not conceal before him. Number one, first of all, he's the actual creator of the tzimtzum. So obviously it doesn't conceal. Secondly, why would it conceal? He sees everything clearly, even though he's using a partition and a tzimtzum and a partition to communicate and create a dependent consciousness, which is us. Our avodah is to reconnect the two. That even though they're separate, das tacht and das elyon, and existence itself, like I said, is in a state of concealment, our mitzvah is liyachid. First, to connect existence to the divine that relates to existence, basically seeing the artist within the art, then coming to realize that God is beyond being artist and art, that's das elyon, and then joining both of them together, that the divine within existence is exactly the same as the divine beyond existence, because God is neither of the two and therefore beyond both and unites both. And that's the ultimate seamless unity, where you have the ultimate interface, that we exist from our perspective, divine completely beyond existence exists, that doesn't recognize basically existence is insignificant, and that both of them become one. Which, yes, it sounds like a paradox. It is a paradox from our point of view, not from God's point of view. So the goal is basically that which is a paradox from our point of view should cease being a paradox once we see it the way God sees it. But all that requires the avodah step by step by step. So that's somewhat of a summary, a general summary of the last 11 pages of Ayin Beis, which is all this hisbonenus of Yichud, of Shema, and Baruch Shem. And the words that he used at the end of page 14, the end of the Hemshech, the last page, was he said that being that from God's point of view that tzimtzum does not conceal, so therefore the Yichud Tatav from Das Tachten is exactly like Yichud Elah, like it is in Atzilus, and even higher than Atzilus, the way it is in God's mind as he envisions it all. Like he said, B'shir Atzmei B'keach. So there's a root, because he's already envisioning existence. However, even that level is all b'yichud b'tachlis to get. Let me just see. Yeah. So all of existence, the way it is in God's envisioning existence, l'fnei tzimtzum, is all part of that oneness. And Bria, from that point of view, creation from that point of view is only a hisgalus. From our point of view, there's an actual beginning. First of all, individually, each of us was born on a certain day. Before you were born, you didn't exist. You, I mean, as a neshama beguf on earth. A neshama existed, but also that has a beginning. But I'm not going to go into that right now. Bria in general began 5,785 years ago. It has a clear beginning. But from God's point of view, like he said, it's only his galus. It's only him expressing another form of expression. And it's only and from that perspective, it's all part of God's unity. And he went back to the mashal of Mashpia Makabel. I'm looking now at page 1477, and said that the primis achitzenius, from God's point of view, it's not separate at all. It's only more revealed, meaning it's more going to be more expressed. So another can benefit. In this case, a student. Or in the case of creation, that creation will emerge. But from the teacher's point of view, it's only his galus. He's not creating anything new. All he is taking a part of his intelligence and channeling it and tailoring it to his student. Okay. So therefore, Klolosin Yisavus, even Ashara Bekeach, Hurak is galus levad, and it's all miyuchah b'tachlis hayichud. And that's the joining together, he says. By Atzmus Beis Hadeis Shovin, das Tachten, the ayin of the yesh. And the yesh that's created by that ayin is in the same level of bitl and yichud like the ayin of the yesh hamiti, from that perspective. Not from our perspective. Our perspective, we have to get to that. We're aspiring to reach that level, but from God's perspective. Okay. Now he goes to our avodah, and that's the Yichud Lamata Neshamas Yisrael. When we say Shema Yisrael Shem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Those two levels of ayin, that's exactly what's expected of us, to go through these stages. First recognizing the divine within existence, then recognizing the divine without, beyond existence. The two levels of ayin of the yesh hanivra, ayin of the yesh amiti. He says, part of the mitzvah is also to connect both of these, to unite these two different perspectives. The mahava echad be'echad, the yichud ha'tata is yichud mamish kama yichud de'elah, which again is a step-by-step process, but can be achieved by each of us relative to our level. Because the ayin of the yesh, we come to discover, even though it is tailored and it is commensurate to our level, but in truth, if you trace it to its root, from God's point of view, it's just exactly like the ayin of the yesh amiti. And comes from Atzmus without any distance at all, because the tzimtzum is not mafsik. So our work is to discover that even after a tzimtzum, where from our point of view, the tzimtzum does conceal and does distinguish between these two levels of ayin, the mitzvah is to be miyachid and come to realize that from Atzmus' point of view, the tzimtzum is not concealing. And therefore, they're all like one, both levels of yichud. And therefore, al-kain gam k'moshe babi is galus hayumayuchad b'tachlis b'atzmusei. So even when it comes in a more revealed state from God's point of view, it's miyuchad with him, like the teacher, that the idea that he's conveying to the student is exactly the same level as the idea that he himself understands. And when Mela, and if you understand that these are two divine energies, so this now transfers over to existence itself also. So that leads us to understand that which is created by the ayin of the yesh hanivra, the lower level, is completely hamshachim min ha'atzmus umiyuchad b'yizbarach b'tachlis hayichud, and it's only his galus. So even though creation initially we understand it as a new entity, because that's how we post-tzimtzum consciousness understands it, we come to relate to pre-tzimtzum, meaning from Atzmus' point of view, that it's only his galus. And that's Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. I'm reading literally the last lines of the Hemshech. Hashem Elokeinu is Yichud Elah. Hashem Echad is Yichud Tata. The difference between Abba ve'Ima and Zun. Chachma being the Yichud of Chachma being the Yichud of Zohar Malchus. And both are in one pasuk. Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. They're not two different psukim. La Mahava Echad be'Echad, because also Yichud Tata is exactly the same unity as Yichud Elah Mamish. And that's how he concludes the Hemshech.
But
so
we have the lower level for this.
And there we have a summary. Let me just finish. And there we see a summary. This is a summary of basically the last 11 pages. In truth, if you think about it, this theme has been going on for much more than 11 pages. It's just in the last 11 pages, he was talking about it in the context of Shema Yisrael, this bonus of the Nefesh Elikis, which then, of course, is going to have an effect on Nefesh Habamis, which we're going to discuss momentarily. So that's a summation of the whole picture. And again, it's our avodah that has to go through step by step to reach these levels. But the Rebbe Rashab laid out the whole map here. And in essence, it's the theme of the entire Ayin Beis, which is interface from the beginning. And now, what I would do next is going to say, if the Rebbe Rashab had continued, what is most likely what he would have written based on what we've learned, based on the whole Hemshech, and based on the Maimorim that are the foundation of this Hemshech. That's what I'm going to do now. But I'll stop if there are any questions about what I just concluded and summed up.
By Amelamed, when he is lowering his level to the level of the Talmud, he knows that this is a lower level. But by Hashem, he's saying that even Yichud Torah is equal to Yichud Elah.
That doesn't mean he doesn't know what he's doing. He also knows he created. If Hashem is employing Hein Heng V'Reis of the Tzimtzum, and he wants to create an existence that has independent consciousness, he's aware of that. It's just that it does not in any way, it's no way different than the levels of the divine that are beyond existence. And at the end of the day, a mashal and an imshal are not going to be exact, because this mashal is from us from human beings. It's not how it is Lamaila, but it's an example that he uses. So we stretch the example as much as we can, and the areas that make it more human, that God is beyond that, then you have to say there the mashal is not exact, but he's not. But here, this point of the mashal is that from the teacher's point of view, he has one seichel. He doesn't have two seichel. It's not like two different minds. It's one mind. That mind understands the big picture, like I gave the example of the Aleph. That in the Aleph of Anochi, he sees the whole Torah. The student is only going to see an Aleph. And when the teacher teaches Aleph, the teacher knows that within the Aleph has all that intelligence in it. However, he also aware that he's saying Aleph, not Beis, and not other things, because that's what he's communicating. When the Eibishter communicate the Kav, that's Nimshach after the Tzimtzum, that creates Atzilus, that Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asiyah, God is quite aware what he's doing. It's not incidental. It's all part of the plan. However, from his point of view, he sees the whole picture. So without the partition and the Tzimtzum, he sees it all as part of one seamless unity. Now, the challenge is for us to see it that way as much as possible.
When you say hang for us, you're saying that God's power to conceal is just as much a part of what he's about and Elikus as his power to reveal. Is that what you mean?
Using the words that he used, he doesn't use the word hein v'reisa. That he uses in Shar Yichud v'Amuna. But if you go back to page,
but I'm also asking what you mean when you say that.
I mean what it says Chassidus. I'm not just saying anything new.
Okay,
I mean what he says when he says on page 1474. If you want to look at the exact language, he used like this: the guy by Atzmus had at Simpson pasim in a mile master cloud. Because Achen Ata Kel Mistata Hester Koyacha Ensav Kamay Koyacha Gilui. He says that in the middle of page 1474. But it's all part of one Atzmus who has a power to reveal, a power to conceal, and it's all one from his point of view. Being that it's all one, Koyacha Ensav had a master klal. That was the middle. We discussed there, I don't know, at length that point. 2 points he made there. One, it doesn't conceal because he sees it from his perspective. Number two, in itself, the concealment itself is his power. So that just makes it even stronger.
So if I understand it correct by a teacher,
Some Maimorim it says, "Vaydaita Moskva Tofresh Nun Zayin." He used the expression "Ein etzem mastir al etzem." Doesn't use that here, I don't think. Not here, at least. Maybe earlier.
So by a teacher, it's stuck at a lower level because he's having only
I just said
mind.
a human being is, at the end of the day, he's giving a mashal. You're pointing out to me how the mashal is not exactly like the nimshal. So we understand that. Every mashal is like that. A mashal is, it can't find exact, but the mashal has many elements that do explain the idea.
Okay. But the Eibishter is different because the lower level is
but here the emphasis on with the commonality between the mashal and the nimshal. Do you understand why the mashal works?
I understand.
And you're pointing out that there's maybe some points in the mashal because it's a human being at the end of the day. He's not emphasizing here that element. He's trying to bring the idea more to make it more palpable. He's giving an example so we can have something to envision what it would be, what it's like when you're dealing with a mishpia makabel. But even then, Hashem does see existence the way we see existence. It's just by him, it's not a separate thing. We see it as separate and steps and steps. From his point of view, he sees, like if you think of a bird's eye view, he sees the whole picture without any concealments. So even though he knows exactly what he's doing, when he said, Vayemer Elokim Yehi Oyer, or Yehi Rakia, Hashem said it very deliberately. He knows he's creating light, and then he's creating a firmament, a sky, and then vegetation, and then all the things he created in the 6 days of creation. Only God knows exactly what he's doing. However, if you look at it from his point of view, not only is it part of one art, It's part of one reality, include the reality of Atzmus. That's the main point he wants to say here. When we look at it, we see different stages. Das Tachten, Das Elyon, the joining of the two. And the goal here is to see it as much as possible from the way God sees it. But it's, of course, going to take a lot of work because we're not God, and we have to climb step by step by step.
How would you explain in one sentence the relation of borrow? What is the creation? Since everything is Him. The
From our
creation is
point
the
of view or
feeling
from
that
God's
we
point
have.
of view? From our point of view, from Atzmus'
From
point of view.
our point of view. Okay, our point of view,
We
feel
are
it's
mortal
separate thing, but from
creatures.
the Eibishter's point of view, what does it mean, borrow?
He
There's
says
nothing
Gili.
new.
He says he's Galus.
It's
Look
galus
on the
to
top of
us.
page 1477. Bria u'b'chinas is Galus, Bria loshen Gili. Bora oisam. So it's Gili
So Gilo
because
is to us, not to him. To him, it's not
no,
a
to
Gilo.
him. No, he's expressing. The Eibusha doesn't need Giluyim, but when he wants it to create, he's expressing something, and it becomes more begili. I think you should read the top of 1477. That's what he elaborates there. He says, by this, but when the teacher wants to teach a student, he has to reveal within himself, with the teacher, a level of his seichel that will relate to the student. The same thing, relatively speaking, by Atzmus, the Bria is an expression. It's a particular expression of a Bria. But Leza Ikar Elikus, the Eibishter is not defined by Bria. It's one expression. Expression means his galus. So existence is an expression of godliness. From our point of view, we don't see that initially. We see existence as a self-standing and self-contained entity, and we come to realize, Ein davar eses atzmei, nothing creates itself, it has to have a creator. And then the creator is beyond it, and all the levels we're discussing here.
But obviously, by the teacher, the student is a separate entity.
Okay, you keep bringing me you keep telling me there's a limitation in the muscle. Yes, a human example.
No, not the limitation. I want to understand it. But the Eibishter, there is no separate entity. Only it looks to us a separate entity.
But from the teacher's point of view, it also to the student only hears Aleph. From the teacher, he knows a lot more than the Aleph.
Okay, but the student is a separate entity from the teacher. They are not.
Because a student as a human being is never going to be like it is in Atzmus. Again, that's the limitation that he's not addressing here because it's not relevant. We understand that. Of course, it's only an example at the end of the day.
But it looks so bad. I'm going to try to fix it. I think.
Yeah. In different words, to use language from the beginning of Ayin Beis, when he speaks about whether Atzilus is Gilia Helam or Yesh Ma'ayin. So from our point of view, existence is Yesh Ma'ayin. Why? Because before it existed, it didn't exist. There's a beginning. Everything has a beginning. And Ayin doesn't mean nothing. Ayin means a different reality. But from God's point of view, existence is true. Existence is just another expression of himself. So it's really His Galus, not even a Yesh Ma'ayin. The reason we call Yesh Ma'ayin from God's point of view is because he is creating a Yesh that's going to have its so-called independence. But from God's point of view, it's just really Gilia Helam, actually. It doesn't say those words here. But it just makes the Yichud a lot deeper. Now the question is, now the challenge is for us to come to understand it that way. And that takes a lot of bittul, a lot of work, because we cannot be miyachid existence with God and say existence is one with God without first recognizing that it's bottled to alakus. Because you could ask the question, why do we need Yichud Ilah for? Why don't we just have Das Tachten Yichud Tata and jump straight to Atzmus? Because we also have to recognize that existence does not have any significance from the point of view of Elikus. Then we come to realize that even existence that God created and gave it credence is also just like the level that is completely bottled to Elikus. Just to add one more point, that may be helpful here.
you said something very powerful and like it was the kitzur, and I didn't quite hear it or copy. I think you were saying that God's you talked about Gilia Helam. You're saying that God's restraint and concealing is a revelation of his power to conceal. Is that what you meant to say? Gilia Helam, what did you mean? I mean, I understand what the words mean, but in this context, can you elaborate, please?
The point of his galus means that from God's point of view, there's nothing new has happened here. All he did was reveal an existence he wanted to create.
No, I get that. I'm focused on Gilia Helam, the revelation of that which is concealed.
That's not what Gilia Helam is, what I meant. Gilia Helam meant the contrast to Yesh Ma'ayin. Yesh Ma'ayin means that something was created that didn't have any existence beforehand. So that's true regarding existence. But from God's point of view, it's also an element of just revealing what he has within him, the ability to create. That's what I meant by that.
When we're talking about
Not the Gili
fall,
of the Helam, more of the concealment. Gili Helam means something that is really there and now just being expressed.
I see. Thank you.
you mentioned
The idea of the
before,
Hein Hang Vuresa that I said is a different point. That's that the Tzimtzum itself is also part of God's power. It's also part of the picture, obviously. God's ability to conceal. That's also correct.
Yeah.
when you mentioned before that
In other words,
before
existence is a
creation-
so let me just say, existence, very existence is a combination of Gili and Helam. Number one, Gili, because God said, Yehi Yehi Rakia, there's a kav after the Tzimtzum that's going to create existence, but it's a Gili that is also subject to a concealment so we can be independent and you could have defined separate entities. But that's not what I meant by Gili Helam per se. I meant it, that is in general. But so all of existence really is all part of God's manifestation. Just it's a combination of Eirei Sof before the Tzimtzum, for example, is only God's power to reveal. There's no concealment there yet. I mean, there's concealment also because it goes from one level to the next, and he has the power to conceal, but the actual concealment manifests in the Tzimtzum.
So, Bakitza, like an extremely balabatisha, like practical layman's perspective, the point, the practical point is that the concealment and with the seeming darkness is just as much a part of God's creation and expression. It's a non-expression, but it's just as much a part of God as the revelation.
That's not the main thing. That's not the main point he's making right now. What you said is correct, and he made that point on page 1474. Now the pictures are much bigger than that. Now he's talking about.
I was still focused on
ultimately.
1474. Yeah, I was.
Okay, if you focused on 1474, he says those words. Where is that? That's the expression used
page.
What?
Right in the middle, 2/3
Yeah.
down.
A little less, a little lower than that, halfway down. The line that begins Kan Shum Hefsek V'Richu Klal.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
when we're talking about the fall creations, it does not mean the fall in time. It means in the level.
Conceptual, yeah. Well, from us, there is remember, time itself was created, and we do speak about year Tavshin Pehei, so we go back, before Tavshin Pehei, there's no existence.
But by Hashem, it's the same thing. It's not Topshin
Again, you're talking about from Hashem's point of view or our point of view?
Hashem.
Hashem, we said it says Galus. Yes, it's conceptual. It's not going. You're not going to find it in actual time. It's happening right now, all the time.
So all time is happening all at once for Hashem? I mean,
Both are true. Because he created time with parameters, so Shabbos is different than Sunday from God's point of view too.
mhm.
But that's what he wanted. From his will point of view, it's all one. But he chose to have also distinctions in time.
So he sees it but all ways. We're the only ones who, in other words,
somewhat
yeah.
like when you go on a plane, you see
Mhm.
you see a lot of space more than you do when you're on the ground.
Yeah. Thanks.
Rabbi Jacob said, if you don't want to answer it here, we could take it after class. But if that, I mean, obviously that is the case, and Hashem is beyond time and knows from everything beginning to end, the whole thing. Then how do you explain the freedom of choice that we're supposed to have if he already knows what's going to be, what's not going to be, and all that? And again, if you don't want to answer, that's fine. But it's just that always has been a question in the back of my mind.
You've never seen an answer given to that question?
I've seen many answers given. I'm just want to know from the Ayin Beis point of view.
Ayin Beis does not add anything to that. Everything said here says in other places. The question of God knowing everything and free will is written up in many places. I could send you links if you want.
That'd be great.
But I'm saying you've never seen answers. It's really been documented.
I've seen answers.
All those answers apply to what it says here too. That's my point.
Okay.
So if you've seen the answers, then whatever it says there, unless you tell me there's a contradiction between those answers and what it says here, I don't believe so.
No, I don't see contradiction. I just wanted to know if there was an additional light.
No, there's no additional. There's no additional. Okay. So now, are there any other? I'm happy to take as many questions as you'd like to ask. Don't hesitate, because this is first of all, we're at the conclusion here, and I just really want to make sure it's very clear as possible. And secondly, it's a topic that deserves plenty of conversation. So
here's another question. I think at the end, Hashem Echad and Shema, first pasuk, and Bichlal in general, are we also saying here that God's revelation and God's concealment are themselves also, how shall I say, parts of Atzmus, like they're Atzmusdik? If you look at it from Das Elyon, then you're saying, on the one hand, you can't really put your finger on Atzmus because it's undefinable, it's unlimited. At the same time, you can say that everything is part of Atzmus. Is that a correct statement?
You're asking from our perspective now?
Well, just well, certainly from God's perspective, but from our perspective, we don't feel that the darkness is part of Atzmus. But if we look at the divine scheme, we're supposed to understand it that way. Yes.
Well, I thought, so just briefly, summing up what I said, there's Atzmus perspective and all the levels we talked about. We start climbing the ladder from our perspective, step by step, and we have here a blueprint of different stages and perspectives, starting from existence and getting to Das Tachten, Yichud Tata, then to Das Elyon, Yichud Elah, and then to the joining of two. Ultimately, it's we are aspiring to see it as closely as possible as we can through God's eyes, but we begin through our eyes.
Of course, but what we're striving toward is to understand that. Well, it's two
as
parts.
Much as possible as we can understand it through God's eyes.
But
so what's your question? I'm not clear what your question is.
Right. I want to sort of make it more specific. Atzmus is present, like right in front of my eyes. I can't put my finger on it, I can't touch it, but I need to understand that all of existence, both the Helam, both the revelation and the concealment, is Atzmustic. So Atzmus is not somewhere else, because I can't because you can't see
So
it or
this
you
is a
can't touch
this
it.
is a step-by-step process. Where you stand, I don't know really, but every one of us has to see where we are. We exist. You feel your body, you feel existence around you, and you want to now grow to a broader and higher level of consciousness. So you're asking me where you stand. You're asking me where I stand.
Where anybody stands, if they try to conceive of this Torah, this Torah Chassidus that we're reading right now.
So the first step is to recognize that when you eat a meal, or you're walking in the street, or you're going to work, that your work and your meal and the street is all part of God creating it in a way that relates to you. That part you got? Das Tachta.
Yes, of course.
Okay, step 2, which takes a lot of work, is coming to realize that all of that is insignificant because God is beyond existence altogether. And then there's the third step where you come to realize that from God's point of view, all of it is like one.
Right. And that's the part I'm getting at. I guess, but I'm talking about something much more, how shall I say, fast. It's not, I don't think it's processing too much, but I'm saying at the end of the day, we're supposed to reach the conclusion that Atzmus is inheres. It's part of our existence. We may not be
Not
able
only
to feel
part
it.
of everything is really just an extension of Atzmus.
That's all I meant to say. That's what I started the question with.
So that's literally what he said here. Let's go back to his words. Umamela kol mash nisava hakol b'chinas hamshacha min ha'atzmus umiyuchad by yizbarach b'tachlis hayichud. I'm reading 5 lines from the end of the Hemshach. Kol mash nisava hakol b'chinas hamshacha min ha'atzmus umiyuchad by yizbarach b'tachlis hayichud. V'urag b'chinas is galus bilvad. If you're asking me, if you're saying what it says here, then it's explicit here. Not even okay.
No. It was that. I don't know if it's that simple, but that's what I was asking.
Well, that's exactly the words here.
Yeah.
Could you translate that, please, Rabbi? Sorry.
I did it before. I mean, we've gone this. I've gone over this at least 5-10 times, maybe.
All right, I wasn't here. I'll have to listen to the recording.
It means everything that was created is a transmission from Atzmus and utterly united with him. That's the translation. Okay.
Wow. I mean, it's hard enough to have that awareness. Just
but that's why I said this takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
You can't reach this level if you don't first reach the first 2 levels. Let me put it that way.
Well, the first level is definitely challenging as well. But thank you.
After both on the Yichud, even the Yichud law is not Atzmus. Atzmus is even above this also, correct? It's above all the whole entire thing.
He's not defining Atzmus here just for the record. He's saying how Atzmus sees it. From Atzmus' point of view, Yichud Taton, Yichud law are equal, yeah.
But he said that the goal is to reach this level that both are equal. So in this level, Yichud law is equal to Yichud Taton.
He says that explicitly. He says that, right? Look at the last line of the Hemshech. I just go back to let's read the Rebbe Rashab. You don't need me. Here he says, Shegam Yichud Tatau b'chinas Yichud k'mo Yichud Eloah mamish. The last line of the Hemshech. That what you're asking?
So in other words, the Yichud law is also clapping him. In other words, the big bull is also nothing but him.
He's not addressing that here. He says this, that Yichud Tatar is just like Yichud Eloah.
And this is the Ainoid?
No, not necessarily. Ainoid is about the Tzimtzum, about that the Tzimtzum itself is the Helama Atzmu. Probably connected, but that I'll leave when I'm going to sum it up. Let me just say this now. I'm going to get to the Einoid. I'm going to get to other things as well, because as I said, this is where Ayin Beis stops. The question is, what would come next? So, but Pashtus, what would come next would be what he started on 1466, 11 pages back. Because that's what he does in Torah and in the Memari Admur Amtsoi. In the Maimar Magbil Shavis, after explaining this level of Yichud, he goes back and now we'll understand, Apizeh will understand how the Nefesh Alekis can be mashpia on the Nefesh Abamis. V'haftas Hashem Alekecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha. Because remember, following Shema and Baruch Shem comes the next statement. V'hafta, love God, Hashem Alekecha b'chol levavcha. B'chol levavcha, the Gemara says, b'shnei yitzarecha, with both sides of your heart, divine soul and animal soul. And that's where it all began. Because if you remember back on page 1466, if you go there, you'll see he has the question, how can you do that? He said, how can the divine soul, how can the soul affect such level of subjugation or sublimation and bittul in the animal soul when the animal soul is beteka vayeshes? Remember, from the animal soul's perspective, all it cares about is its own needs. That's the ultimate opposite, the diametric opposite of Hashem Echad. Hashem Echad, it's all about God. The Nefesh Abam is all about himself. Hepech habit legamri. That was the question on page 1466, which is the question that asked in the Maimon HaMagbil Shevis and of the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe. And he said to answer that question, Yesh lahagdim tchila. I'm reading from page 1466. You have to preface what is Krishma in Parshat Shena. That it says that in Krishma says V'ahavta b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha. And he goes on to say these are the two levels of Yichud. So in other words, all that which we learned is all coming now to bring it back. What I've been saying is now let's make this practical. Practically speaking, we're not on the level of Yichudei law, definitely not on the level of the two Yichudim together. We're dealing with a Nefesh Abamis that's not interested in all of this. All it is interested in self. And still, the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe say, and as I said, the Pashtas, that would be the next section, Ayin Beis, unless the Rebbe Rashabi wanted to speak more about the Yichudim. Doesn't sound like to me, it sounds like he did finish that. But regardless, the next idea would be, okay, so now how do we transfer this concept to an animal soul that doesn't have any interest in this? And the answer there is, as I quoted in my essay, and we'll learn it inside when we review the essay together, is the Nefesh Abamis has seichel. Remember, Shemen. Shemen is the seichel of the Nefesh Abamis, which means the Nefesh Abamis can understand things. And you can explain it on its terms, this idea of Yichud. And the Alter Rebbe maintains, and the Rebbe Mittler Rebbe elaborates, that this is what the Nefesh Alekis explains to Nefesh Abamis. This is what the wick is, the Nefesh Alekis that's inserted in the oil of the, remember, Ner Hashem Nishmasadam, the Ner. And in turn, we'll take the oil of the animal soul and say, listen, I will educate you, and I will train you, and I will harness you, and I will tame you, and I will harness you to come to appreciate that your very existence comes from God. And not only that, even higher than that, Yichudei law, and all the way higher to the highest levels. That's the next section, would most likely would have been the Ayin Beis, because that's the next section in the Maimar Magbil Shevis. And the Rebbe Rashab himself asked this question and didn't answer it. And he said, Yesh lahagdim, this whole inyan of Yichud. So that's what we need to understand next, is how the Nefesh Alekis explains it to the Nefesh Abamis. So the Alter Rebbe says it briefly in his Maimer in Torah. The Mittler Rebbe elaborates. In my essay, I brought at length the quotes from the Mittler Rebbe that explains how an animal soul can understand this idea. In fact, the way we're learning it right now, we're learning it in a way that the animal soul should be able to understand. This isn't just my divine soul speaking to your divine soul. Everything we're talking about here is something that the Seichel Anushi, meaning human intelligence, can understand. That's what I brought earlier about science, technology. These are things that the human mind, the intellect can understand, that a world that seems so fragmented and so separate and diverse is really all part of a larger unity. And that's where the Nefesh Habamis, as it begins to understand that, it slowly it can acclimate itself and become and experience and integrate the bittul that we're talking about, to the point that there should be V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha, also the Nefesh Habamis. That's the next section that was, as I said, would have most likely been followed what we learn now. I mean, that's even a bigger chiddush, because it's one thing to say the divine soul could understand das Tachten, das Elyon, the Deus Hashem, the Yichud of both, Yichud Tata, Yichud Ilah, and the Yichud. It's a whole other story to say even the animal soul can understand that. And not just understand that, it should evoke an emotion, V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha, love for God, for the animal soul. And that is, I will, what we'll probably do is maybe next class, I'll post the whole essay. So there I quoted the Mittler Rebbe, so we don't have to go back to the Sefer. I actually have all the relevant quotes that can help us understand how that would have been explained. But of course, with a big caveat and qualification that this is the way the Mittler Rebbe says it. The Rebbe Rashab most likely would have elaborated even more and probably added things. But that part, we're not prophets. We can't guess exactly what the Rebbe Rashab would have added. But there are some things we could say because he did say it earlier. So we'll do all that next. That will be where we're up to now as we are attempting to, like I said, see where this would have continued had the Rebbe Rashab continued writing.
Rabbi, the intellect, the human intellect, is part of the Nefesh HaBahamis, right?
Yeah.
Is that, yeah. Okay, so that's the whole transformation, is to take that intellect and get it to that level. Okay.
No, it's not to ignore the animal soul, but to engage it, basically.
Thank you.
Now, keep in mind that on page 1465, he already explained partially how the divine soul explains it to the animal soul. I will refer to that as well.
Where precisely, please?
Bottom line is that when the animal soul begins to appreciate that the reality of existence is not me, but is the divine energy, you start weakening the hold of materialism on the animal soul. If you go back to 1465, he said it explicitly. I just looked at it. He said that the more the animal soul understands that, so think about it. Even though there are scientists that are arrogant and materialistic, but if you really think about what a scientist is doing, to use Einstein's words, understanding God's mind, you start seeing the wonder and the awe and the sheer majesty of existence and realize this is like the footprints or the fingerprints, even better, of God's fingers, of God's creation. So, but inevitably, if it's done right, without any other agendas, and without without the arrogance that the symptom creates, you come to become more refined, more sensitive. Because if you see all of existence as divine, it should make you a more refined person. Just to use a simple example, I remember once, a number of times in classes I've given, and people ask about the Jewish view on environmentalism, meaning protecting ecology, the environment. And I've always shared the story where the Rebbe Rashab and the Frierdiker Rebbe were taking a walk. And the Frierdiker Rebbe was a little boy. And as they were conversing, the Frierdiker Rebbe inadvertently ripped off a leaf from a tree and began to rub it, like we all commonly can do. And the Rebbe Rashab reprimanded him and said, do you know the trajectory of this leaf? That you now intervened and ripped it off a tree and basically ended its life right there. It has a purpose. It's sacred. It's part of God's creation. It's a leaf of a tree, let alone an animal or a human being. Why? Because everything in existence is sacred. When you start recognizing the divine, not only do you want to protect the environment, it's more than just protecting the environment for selfish reasons so we can live longer and not destroy our future resources. It's because it's God's creation. Bal tashchis is a sin of the Torah. You're not allowed to do anything that's wasteful, which means even throwing out a piece of paper that can be used. And I can tell you from working with the Rebbe, you have to see how the Rebbe was so careful. When he wrote to us, he would write on the back of envelopes. On paper, he would write on the corners. There was a certain deliberate and very extremely deliberate effort not to waste anything. So why? Because the world is sacred. So the more you recognize das Tachten that we're talking now, the more you recognize the divine energy in everything, inevitably, if you think about what's the next step, it's not your world. You can't do with it whatever you like. You can't do with your body whatever you like. Your actions. This was given to you as a gift. It's a divine gift. You have to be very careful how you protect it. More than just, as I said, for human reasons, for divine reasons. It's a divine existence. Just as one example. So basically, the Nefesh Habamis can fully understand that. Obviously, you have to take the time and patience to explain it, because it's natural, it gravitates to its own needs. But with the process of, that's why we daven, with the process of Shema Yisrael, which is preceded by Birchas Yetzer, if you recall about the Malachim, that helps soften up the animal soul. It's like seeing someone davening with great love and passion and reverence. So it softens you up. You become more responsive. And then Shema. So it's not that inconceivable to realize that ultimately the animal soul can be transformed. It can be trained to think in a more refined way. That's how this process works. Then, of course, we'll talk about going to higher levels of Yichud and Das Elyon and so on. But let's just stop on the basic level, because the animal soul has to understand it on its terms. And that's indeed exactly we're not talking about Atzmus' perspective yet. We're talking about how do you explain godliness on our terms. Because in the interface of Ayin Beis and the interface of the Yichud we're talking about, you have to begin where the person is. You can't jump and leap to places before you first basically create a more refined person. Start talking to a Nefesh Habamis about Yichud Ilah, or even more so, about Atzmus that's higher than both, you completely lose it because it doesn't relate to it. Yeah, intellectually you can understand it perhaps, but it's all theoretical. The first step is, will the animal soul respond and become a more refined and more sensitive and a more compassionate and empathetic entity as a result of recognizing that your true reality is the godliness within you. And that's your existence. So that's just the beginning of explaining. As I said, we'll learn it more inside with the Mittler Rebbe's, the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe's elaboration, and then try to work our way up from there. Good. Any other questions?
Just a comment. It's really awesome.
Yeah. Yes, it is. But when you start experimenting, you see Nefesh Habamis is going to resist. It's not going to be that easy. Even after this explanation that I just said, you would think that would make us all very sensitive. Next time we walk in the street,
Yeah.
there's an expression with when a wicked person walks on the cobblestones, the stones cry out, "What right do you have to walk on us? We
Mhm.
never transgressed God's will, and you did. What right do you have to walk on us who never transgressed?" So can we maintain such a level of cognizance and awareness? I think you can begin, but it's an effort. It takes time because this is training. This is the real work of changing our perspective on things. So next time somebody insults you, or you think they insulted you, Next time something bothers you or something irks you or something is annoying or aggravating, think about it. God's running the world, hashgacha pratis, and so on. Again, this doesn't mean we turn the other cheek, and there are times we have to obviously protect ourselves and defend ourselves. So this isn't just about ignoring, but it's elevating, and that everything you want to do is not just based on a knee-jerk natural reaction. It's based on what would God want me to do. That changes the whole equation. Imagine what the world would look like if we all thought that way, right? So it's the work. This is now we're talking about the real nitty-gritty. This is the hard part that I'm discussing now. In a way, everything we learned till now, I'm not saying it's not complex, but doesn't take that much work, meaning personal avodah. The personal avodah starts with, okay, let's engage in Nefesh Habamis and let's see who wins out when you're going to eat breakfast today or lunch or dinner or interact with others. And at the end of the day, when you say Shema in the evening, ask yourself, how well did you do? This is real avodah.
I mean, it gets to the concept. I mean, when you say sometimes alavai beinoni, we're stuck with this constant struggle. As much as we learn, we're never going to get away from the Yetzer Hara. I mean, unless you're a tzaddik, which is one in a generation.
The goal is not to get away. The goal is to climb the ladder, to keep working toward, I mean, some of you have told me learning Ayin Beis has changed your life, has refined you, or learning Chassidus in general. That's an example. That doesn't mean we got rid of the Yetzer Hara. I didn't get rid of mine yet.
Yeah, no,
I've been learning this a long time,
Yeah. No, what I would even suggest more is the more I would say armed, but are armed with Torah, with knowledge that which we're talking about in this class. The more armed one is with the information necessary to transform oneself, it seems, my experience, which in Chassidus has transformed my life, is that the Yetzer Hara fights back just as hard. The harder the
no. Listen, all you don't even need to learn Tanya to know that.
Yeah, but it's pretty frustrating because the harder you try, the harder the Yetzer Hara fights you back and tries to find all kinds of ways to get you off your game.
So the whole Tanya comes to address that frustration, that you keep forging ahead, make slow progress. It doesn't have to be. It's not like winning the marathon. It's about a constant forward progress, and never get frustrated, because there's a Perik in Tanya, what Perik Chavtes, I forgot which Perik. The Alter Rebbe says, you come to think that the whole reason your neshama came down was for this very battle and frustration you just described. So instead of seeing the frustration as frustration, see it as that's exactly what God wanted, that you would be frustrated and still move it forward and slowly. It's not, in other words, it's not as simple as just, okay, you won the prize, you won the contest, you win the prize and go to sleep. It will be an ongoing battle, but we'll get better and better at it. And most importantly, you know that you're fulfilling God's will, even in the battle, and as well as influencing others. So there's two ways to look at a frustrating, or let's call it challenging situation. You either embrace it and say, you know what, I'm excited by the very prospect, even though it's going to be difficult, or it demoralizes you. And that's what I'm up to Tanya right there, chapter 26. We start talking about negating any demoralization that comes from this battle.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
So that's already, you'll need to have support system, friends, right attitudes, positive growth, reinforcement, feeling that you've accomplished. I mean, but just know this: none of us, we're all in the same boat. We all have this challenge. And being around people who you ask others, how do you deal when things are seeming frustrated and you don't feel you're making enough progress, or you feel everything I've done, and then it just comes back again. My animal soul just tugs me right back to where I was.
Mm-hmm.
This is very common questions. The Alter Rebbe was asked by his Chassidim. The Rebbe was asked, and just know it's part of the journey. Look, last week's parsha we read about God, and even every parsha, Shlach, Korach, and Moshe keeps telling the Jews, how many times are you going to complain? Look at all the blessings you've had. And again, another setback, another challenge. They don't like the meat. They don't like they have no meat. then they don't like they're going to Israel, then they, one thing or another. It's like a constant journey. I remember someone in one of my classes said to me, he finished the whole Chumash the first time. He read it through that year. And he said, I thought there'd be a happy ending. Like they get into Eretz Yisrael finally and so on. And even that they don't do. End of Chumash, they end up on the other side of the River Jordan. It's only Yeshua, the next generation, they go in. And he said to me constantly, this thing. Then God says, 10 times you've complained. You're missaying him. You're complaining about this and complaining. And they had all the miracles in the world, etc. So I told the guy, I said, that's life. The Torah is not a fairy tale. It's not about happy endings. It's about what real life is like. Real life is not black and white. It's a struggle. It's frustration. There's setbacks. But we keep forging, and we finally end up in the promised land, and Mashiach will come. But that doesn't minimize the fact that we have plenty of battles. Most of all, the battle with our own animal soul. And, the example I often give with the seltzer bottle. Did I ever tell this to you? Guys, so I was once giving a class in Manhattan, and there was some title, I forgot what it was. Then on the tables were set up, we had like some refreshments, and we had bottles of seltzer. So one guy opened the bottle. We all go through this. He was a little impatient. He opened the bottle, ended up on top of him instead of in the cup. It didn't explode, but it just came shooting out the pressure. So I decided I'll change the topic. I called it the art of opening up a seltzer bottle. And I said the following, that the key is not to turn impatiently, but 2 turns to open and 1 turn back. 2 to open, 1 turn back. And slowly it releases the pressure of the gas, and you have yourself a seltzer bottle that's open. I said in life, the key is not always forward progress. But when you're moving forward, always make sure there are 2 steps forward before you go 1 step back. Because in life, there's always going to be setbacks. There'll always be times you have to slow down. But at least for every 2 steps you're going forward and 1 step back, so you're always moving forward. If 1 step forward and 1 step back, you're always in the same place. And that was my whole, when I went on a lesson in life from the opening of a seltzer bottle. And I think that's the way we should look at it. That the moments when we're inspired and driven and motivated, make sure you do a lot more than the moments when there's a lull or there's a downside, and when you're like a little more despondent. So then you're always 2 steps for 1. You can do 3 steps for 1 is great too, whatever works. But the point is, forward progress. There you have a practice, some chassidus applied to this whole discussion.
Yeah, beautiful.
I never shared that before. I've shared it in classes. You never heard
I
that
don't
one?
think I've heard that. I would remember that. The seltzer butter, the seltzer board. That's going down for a while.
Yeah. And it works. Try it out.
It occurred to me.
I learned the hard way. What do you think? I opened up seltzer bottles on my whole, on myself as well.
It occurred to me, thinking about, let's just say the animal kingdom. You could take the other kingdoms as well, plants and inanimate, but the animal kingdom is an interesting one to look at. How animals just act in accordance with God's will. In that sense, they're in some sense more part of a divine scheme than we are, because we have free choice. We have to choose to be part of that divine scheme, or we can choose to be myopic and focus on the material and miss miss the important, the main point of being here, which is all around us. And of course, the answer is Torah mitzvahs, and God gave us an instruction manual how He wants us to follow His will, because the animal's just following God's will naturally. It's not thinking about it; it's just doing it. And how do we do that? Well, we have to make a choice to follow God's will, which of course is expressed in Torah and halacha and all that. And it seems that's our way of blending into the divine scheme and being part of it, I think.
Yeah. And in general, I would just say Chassidus in general, employs more than just follow God's orders. It excites the human being, including the animal soul, to a point where you really, because remember, the only force that's going to challenge the animal soul is a pleasurable alternative. Because animal soul is going to argue it's much more pleasurable to indulge in your desires and your temptations and your needs and your lusts and so on. So that's why it's so critical that you have geschmack, a geschmack in learning Chassidus, in Avodas Hashem, in helping others, in teaching. That's a big part of it because it is a counterforce. Because if you don't have that, the animal soul is going to make a very good case. You have more pleasure here. Why go do that? It may be more correct what Hashem wants, but it's very boring or very unstimulating, etc. So that's a big part of what Chassidus is meant to be, that we learn it in a way that excites the senses, stimulates your talents, your potential, and so on. That's ultimately the biggest way, the greatest way of really fighting the animal soul. Very hard to just basically repress and say, okay, let's do nothing. We'll just refrain from following my animal soul. The human being needs always action, always. I mean, the truth is in healing, and especially when you deal with addictions and so on, you don't just tell someone, get off your addiction, create an alternative. They're addicted to something good. So the energy is being rechanneled instead of just being repressed. Very hard to hold back. You have to rechannel. So to me, I use that all the time. Whether educating children, inspiring them, you can't just tell them don't do bad. You have to give them something that's equally powerful and compelling.
All of this is like really rewiring the brain. I mean, when we learn all of this, it's so incredible.
And emotions. It is incredible, and it's tremendous stuff. And when expressed in more universal and even secular terms, you suddenly see its power. The problem is, I know, I grew up in this system, so it was discussed in such cryptic Hebrew that I never even appreciated when I first learned many of these things. To me, it was a bunch of words, it was like learning Gemara, which is brilliant, but it was very technical, very technical. It's when you start understanding its deeper objective of lifting up, refining yourself, consciousness, maturity, growing intellectually, emotionally, like you said, rewiring the brain, rewiring the heart, or at least harnessing them, directing them, then it becomes, wow, this is that's to me why I feel like in many ways, I feel my mission is to help develop a new psychological model for the world based on Torah Chassidus, universal model, I should add.
It's beautiful. Wonderful. You're doing great work, Rabbi. Thank you so much.
I'll just tell you, I just saw, if I may, yesterday, a fellow came to visit me. His name is Louis Henry Mitchell. He's a creative director for Sesame Street. He's a Black individual, lives in Queens here. He wrote a book called Creative Evolution, How to Question Everything to Find Your Creative Fulfillment. Very good book. He sees me as his major mentor, and he has a whole section. I have to show this to you. Quite mind-blowing. I don't know if you could see it on the screen here, but I'll show you. Can you see that page? These are 2 pages from Toward a Meaningful Life that he marked up. Wow. He has my book marked up from head to toe. How I befriend my books. And if you want, I could read you a little section if you have a few minutes. I just thought I was very touched.
That's fantastic.
He writes, I don't just read my books, I consume them. I underline phrases that spark thought. I add sticky notes to pages I want to reference again and again. I write notes in the margins. I draw boxes around paragraphs I want to emphasize. If a book has wisdom to share, I highlight it and add in my own words what I've learned. Here's an example of how I make a book my own. The book is my copy of Toward a Meaningful Life. What happens if you lose that book with all those notes and highlights and stickies in it, people ask me. My answer is simple. When I devour books like this, they become part of me. This level of immersion helps me to own the content, absorbing it into my mind and heart. Even when I don't carry the book with me, I always have its wisdom in me. My relationship with this particular book grew even deeper when I reached out to the author, Rabbi Simon Jacobson, for permission to use the above picture. When I described what his book means to me and how I appreciate it with the notes and stickies, he was intrigued and wanted to meet me. We spent an afternoon together and began a personal friendship beyond the book. And then he finishes that section, says, "You are your best teacher, so be your best student." Lewis Henry Mitchell. I just got this yesterday for him, so I thought I'd share it.
That's lovely.
Right? Very beautiful. And the book is a great book. I recommend it. I told my office they should post it. Very interesting book. Very good.
It's all coming together. I sent you something about how now science says quantum physics has shown that there is consciousness
Yeah. I
after.
saw that. Very good. Yes.
Yeah,
Very
yeah,
good.
yeah. Amazing.
Did you send that to me, Robin?
I think I did, yes. And I also sent it to Rabbi if you want.
Yeah, I see. Death doesn't exist. Right. I saw that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't want to
I
post
think
it
you
on
sent it to me a few days ago in an email, maybe.
I don't know, but
Okay.
it just really struck me because it's really what I mean. It's all coming together. It's all these
Let
concepts.
me just end the recording. I want to ask you guys about what's going on in Israel, your opinion. Let me just stop this a moment. So we finished Ayin Beis. We did a somewhat of a review, and we'll continue. Oh, I should say, I feel sorry to say this. Tomorrow I'm off to California tomorrow morning for the weekend. I'm speaking there in Hancock Park. Thursday night, tomorrow night, I'm giving a big talk with Rabbi Soloveitchik about the Rebbe and the Rav and Rabbi Soloveitchik. I'll be Shabbos in Hancock Park, and then Sunday I fly back. So Monday we'll resume. I'm sorry, I know it was already a whole week. I was in Brazil till yesterday, now back, but what should I tell you?
Not forget Israel.
Then before that was Israel, exactly.
We'll review.
It's a good excuse. We'll give you permission.